The first people found vast, empty spaces. Horizons wide as the mind. Forests deep with shadows. And silence. In the early 1840s, the first settlers saw a land of promise. Soil rich and black beneath tapestries of wildflowers. A rolling landscape alive with game. And nights filled with stars so near you could almost reach up and touch them. He was Scotch-Irish from Tennessee, John Neely Bryan. One day he would die in an Austin insane asylum and be buried in an unmarked grave. But now, in the fall of 1841, he was driven by a vision. He would build a community on a bluff above the Trinity at a limestone ford where travelers were sure to pass. There would be streets lined with houses and stores, churches and schools. Steamboats laden with goods would come up the Trinity from Galveston Bay. He would build a city at this place. A crazy dream? Probably. But Bryan laid out town lots, named the place Dallas, and began promoting his site to all who would listen. Some were lured by the glowing advertisements of the Peters Colony through its agreement with the Republic of Texas. They came by ox-drawn wagon, by mule, or horseback. From Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, and Missouri. Others, many of them musicians or artists, arrived directly from France, Switzerland, or Belgium to be part of a utopian community called La Reunion. Whatever their backgrounds, the settlers risked everything to start a new life in a new and unknown land. Most were farmers, but as time passed, there came blacksmiths, teachers, doctors, merchants, wagon makers, shoemakers, saloon keepers, and preachers. Some came as slaves. It was as diverse and robust a cast of characters as any in the land. What John Neely Bryan had envisioned was coming to pass. Life was hard, lived close to the earth. They lived in crude houses of log and clapboard. Cold winds arrived from the north. Freezing rain, floods, drought, and sickness were occasional companions. The new settlers had little, yet they had their land and a chance to build a better life. Little by little, they managed to soften the hard, sharp edges of life on the frontier. The Caddo, Kiowa, Wichitas, and other tribes had hunted for centuries on these lands and used the crossing place on the Trinity. Occasionally, they could still be seen beyond the fields, riding, hunting, watching. Although Dallas was spared the bloody conflicts that other frontier areas suffered, the Indian presence along the Trinity was an unsettling reality. In 1843, Sam Houston called the chiefs of the 9 area tribes together to meet near Dallas at Grapevine Springs. The chiefs agreed to move their people further west. Other settlements soon sprang up in the area that would become Dallas County: Hoard's Ridge, Cedar Springs, Farmers Branch, Lancaster. When in 1850 an election for county seat was held, the winner was Dallas over Hoard's Ridge and Cedar Springs. The years passed, the towns grew. The settlers struggled to build a life in the wilderness. But just as it seemed that John Neely Bryan's vision was within grasp, something seemed to snatch it away again. The fires began on a hot July afternoon in 1860, ravaging the courthouse square. Soon half the town was gone. Every store, both hotels, virtually the entire business district. On that same afternoon, mysterious fires broke out in 7 other Texas towns. Was it a coincidence? Many believe the fires were set by area slaves, inspired by visiting abolitionist preachers. Retribution was swift and terrible. A vigilante committee, after meeting at the courthouse, hanged 3 slaves. Their order to whip all slaves in the county was largely ignored. The slave rebellion, if that's what it was ended. Within a week, people began to rebuild the town. Many believed the fire was a blessing, for many of the new buildings were far more substantial than the hastily constructed structures that burned. With the issue of slavery still inflaming the nation, Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860. The next year, Dallas County voters endorsed secession from the Union by a margin of 3-1. Thus began the Civil War, or for Southerners, the War of Secession. With so many men gone off to war to fight for the Confederacy, women and children were left to fend for themselves, managing homes and shops, often working with slaves. Military officials confiscated farm animals and crops for the war effort. There were shortages of nearly everything. Shoes were made of cloth or from leather cut from saddles. Despite the hardships of the war, loss of lives and property, the people of Dallas proved they were far from conquered. All they needed was a chance again, and after a period of reconstruction, they found it in the iron thunder and wailing whistle of the railroad. First, Dallas leaders persuaded the Houston and Texas Central to build its line through town in 1872 en route to the Red River. Then, leaders of Dallas bamboozled the Texas legislature to route the Texas and Pacific through town from east to west. To cement the deal, Dallas citizens offered the railroad a site for a depot, free right-of-way, and $100,000. Dallas had become a railroad crossroads, a hub of activity, and at the same time a permanent bridge, sponsored by the resourceful Sarah Horton Cockrell, was constructed to span the Trinity. The arrival of the railroad would bring Dallas County's era as a frontier community to an end. But what a rollicking adventure it had been. In less than one human lifetime, the community had grown from a hard-scrabble gamble in the middle of nowhere to a viable town with a very real future. They had tamed the wilderness, endured the hard times, celebrated the good times, and what a time they had.